let's get into a quick agenda of what we're going to be discussing today. Let's say probably for the next 1 hour or 45 minutes, we're going to be having discussion. So we'll just set up a stage on what is the expectation here. So what are we trying to learn or get some insights on? The first thing that we're going to be keeping out of the way is going to be definition. So I'm not going to be getting into the definitions of what defines a dark web or what defines a Bitcoin. So I'm just going to be giving you the information that I've learned in a practical aspect. So that is going to be one. And the second thing is we are not going to be getting into any sorts of hype train. So when I say hype train, what I mean is, so if you have already seen like talks in terms of YouTube or in news, so there is actually too much of exaggeration happening around. So whenever people refer to dark web, so people directly get into drugs, like weapons. So those are also actually part of the dark web, but it is going to be too much of hype. So just by giving your phone or just by knowing your IP address, people are able to hack your devices. There is too much of hype around in the general media. So I'm not going to be getting into any of the hype. So I'm going to be focusing on the practical insight. So what is actually happening in the industry? So that is what we're going to be discussing, and we're going to be trying to understand what is a dark web. So when I say dark web, so the intention is to make sure that you will be able to understand, or resonate. Okay, so this is what basically dark web is. So that is the idea, to basically understand what it is, and then how these instruments, let's say dark web or Bitcoin, so how these instruments are being leveraged to perform cybercrime, or from a cyber attack perspective. So how these are being leveraged, and the why aspect. So why do people use dark web or Bitcoin when they get into cyber attacks? So this is the overall agenda. So obviously I'm not going to be getting into too much technical aspect as to like how dark web functions as a whole. So it itself is going to be taking like probably a week of class just to understand, from a complete technical accuracy perspective. So the idea here is to have a clear understanding of what dark web is and why it is being leveraged. The same goes with Bitcoin as well. So with that said, we'll go into the first topic. So this is going to be a slightly technical conversation we're going to have. Okay, so in order to understand the essence of what dark web is, to actually know what dark web is without getting into the hyper, we need to be having some level of technical knowledge. So again, so we'll be touching upon a basic level of understanding so that you're going to be able to understand what I'm speaking. So if I'm going to jump into the conversation saying that it is going to be encrypted, nobody will be able to see. So unless or until you're going to be having a basic understanding of what encryption is or like what anonymity is, it is not going to be useful. So we're going to be trying to set the stage first to understand like the basic technical concept. So one of it is going to be IP address. So to put extremely simple, IP address is going to be similar to the address that is being used for sending posts and all. So it is like extremely simple in that way. So whenever we are in a cyberspace, so when I say cyberspace, what I mean is, so right now we are in a webinar, right? So I'm based off Abu Dhabi. So I'm presenting myself here, and you are able to access the data that is available here. So this communication over internet, so we call it cyberspace. So cyberspace is slightly bigger than internet. So whatever communication that happens over cyberspace, so we should be able to locate where is it coming from. So for now, like it is going to be from my place, and you are on the receiver end, right? So whenever the data is going to be communicating at a network over cyberspace, so they need to know where it is being sent and from where is it coming from. So that is where a term called IP address is going to come into picture. So just like how in a post we say, from and to, whatever data packets that are going in, or put simply data that is being transferred, so it is going to be having a source to mention where is it coming from, and it is also going to be having the information of where is it trying to go. So this is where IP address is, and a lot of the conversation we're going to have today is going to revolve around IP address. So I just wanted to make sure that you have a basic level of understanding. Now let's try to put it in a practical aspect. So what basically IP address means, we all use Google, right? So we go and try to access Google web server, so we try and search and all. So when me from my laptop, when I'm going to be trying to access Google server, so with what I had told you right now, there is going to be an IP address involved. So this particular IP address here, okay, so this is how basically an IP address looks like. So it is going to be like 4 numbers separated by dots. So this is basically an IP address, and my laptop here will be trying to communicate to this IP address. Probably if you have your phone, you can actually type this in your browser. So it is going to take you to the Google web server. Probably I can show that to you as well. Just 1 second. The essence or the crux of computer networks that we're going to be discussing. So make it very clear that if you are going to be communicating to someone over the internet, so that IP address is going to be the one which says where is it trying to go. Okay, so make sure that you understand this IP address in itself is not like a confidential information. Okay, so IP address is going to be known. So if I'm going to be trying to access your application, I will be knowing your IP address. So IP address in itself is not like a confidential, like safe kind of information. So if you had that kind of perspective, keep it away. And the other part is, for me to communicate over the network, even I should be having an IP address. So I myself is going to be requiring to have an IP address, and the person that I'm going to communicate to, the server in this case, should also have an IP address. So this is how the whole communication of internet is going to work. So there are going to be other misconceptions also. So let's say if somebody knows the IP address, they'll be able to track where you are and all. So that is also a bit of an exaggeration. So we'll take that also out of the way. So for now, let's focus on the next IP address here. So this is one of the IP address. If type this IP address, you're going to be basically able to see your university's webpage. So that also I'll quickly show you. So we are very clear that IP address is the way to communicate in the cyberspace. And we also got to understand that there is going to be an IP address for the person who is actually initiating the connection. So now let's quickly understand what's going to be my IP address. So this is going to say an IP address. So I told you, right, both the server as well as me as a client, both of us are going to be having an IP address. So this particular IP address is the one that is associated to me as a user. Okay, so what are the information that you'll be able to basically get if you know someone's IP address? Okay, so you will be able to get the location of the user. So that is going to be true. So if you see here, it says that the city is Abu Dhabi. Okay, so for my IP address, I'm from Abu Dhabi, UAE right now. So, and then it is going to be touching upon an aspect for ISP also. So we'll get here, but this is the maximum a user can get to understand just by knowing an IP address. So let's say you find out somebody's IP address, you will be able to identify the location to the level of a city. Okay, you will be able to say that, okay, so this IP address belongs to this city. So that level of information you will be able to trace back, but you will not be able to tell like where I'm actually sitting right now, like my building, my street. So that information is not going to be available based out of an IP address. So IP address can be tracked, but to a limited extent. Okay, so with that said, let's go back to the cybercrime aspect of the cyberspace in general. Okay, going back. So this is the IPS that we discussed for the university, and then let's bring in the cyber crime aspect of it. Let's say me, I'm sitting here, and then I'm trying to do an attack on the Google server. Okay, so let's say I'm going to be trying to do this. So there are like multitude of attacks that can be performed. Okay, so it is not like limited to a particular attack like compromise and all. So there are multitude of attacks that can be performed. So if I am performing an attack from my laptop on Google, so the Google is going to obviously have my IP address. So that we made it very clear, because the Google to send you back the data, I'm typing google.com, so the Google is sending me back the data, right? So for him to send the data back to me, he's going to be having my IP address. So a party, like two parties, communicating with each other, they're going to be having the IP address of each other. But how do we associate it to a person now? So we got to know that with IP address, we'll be able to only get to the city level. So it is not going to be possible beyond that. So this is where the internet service provider or ISP is going to be coming into the picture. Okay, so let's say I did some sort of cyber crime or an attack, and then they got to this IP address. So basically, when we talk about internet service provider, so they are the one who are providing us with internet access. So what they do is they keep a track of who's going to be having which IP address at a specific point in time. Okay. So let's get back to where we were. So I was talking about the IP address part. Okay. So how will somebody, let's say there is going to be an attack that is happening in the internet. Okay. So what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to get back to the IP address. So there are going to be, again, getting back to the IP address is going to be based on the logs. Okay. So whenever somebody accesses a web server, there are going to be logs that needs to be stored on the server. So if there are logs stored on the server, and if an attack has happened, so what they will be able to do is they'll be able to identify which IP address the communication is from. So which is going to be going back to this particular IP address. But from what we understood, this IP address can only take it back as far as the city and not the actual user. So this is where like law enforcement is going to be coming into the picture. So the law enforcement can request the details of this particular IP address. Okay, so if I'm going to be getting an internet connection, I'm going to be providing my KYC details, right? Like who am I, all those details. So whenever an internet service provider is like operating this service, he is supposed to have at one point in time which user had that particular IP address. So we will be able to request, like not you and me. So as a law enforcement, they will be able to request the internet service provider, and then they will be able to identify who was the user having this particular IP address at this point in time. So this is how basically we will be able to associate some activity that is happening in the cyberspace back to a user in the actual real world. So this association is going to be based out of the ISP having a list of IP addresses who he has given the IP address to. So if an attack happens, we're going to be going back to the IP address, and then we're going to check who had that IP address at that point in time, and then we'll be able to nab that particular portion, right? Any queries or clarification so far from anybody, or is it clear? Okay, so I'll go ahead the next part. So now let's try and understand like where is this you know dark web or all the rest of the items come into the picture. So basically, when I'm trying to access a server, what we know, if I'm going to be accessing the server from my laptop directly, the server is going to know where my IP address is coming from, and then he'll be able to locate me as a portion, right? So using the help of ISP. So instead of me directly going to the server, what I'll do is I'll basically try and have another server in between. So I'm going to be sending the message or data to this server, and this server is going to be sending the data or the communication to the server. So instead of me directly sending it to the target, I'm going to be relaying it to another server. So basically, we call it relay. So what is the advantage? If the server is trying to identify who the culprit is, they're going to go back to this server's IP address, right? So that is going to be the advantage. So in this case, like let's say 55 is the IP address, the server is going to be knowing that okay, this is the portion who did it. Obviously, if you're going to be trying to understand more, so what you can do is you can get back and see this server is managed by who, and then you can try and identify who, which device was communicating to the server at this point in time. But as I told you before, there has to be appropriate logs that are configured in this server. So only if logs are configured in this server, you'll be able to track it back to this user. Otherwise, it is not going to be possible. So this is just like one level. Similarly, what we can do is we can add multiple levels to it or multiple relays. So instead of me directly talking to the server that I intend to communicate, what I can do is I can relay it to through multiple servers. Okay, so I'm going to be sending the request to him. So this guy is going to be sending the request to this server, and then so on and so forth. So if you try and identify from this server, all he's going to know is 55. If you ask this server, it is going to be knowing 129 and the Google. So similarly, only the person or the server that sent the communication from and where is it going to, it is going to be known by each of the server. So the other difficulty that might come in here is, see, I mentioned that you'll be able to track it back to the person based on law enforcement, right? What if these servers are come in a completely different country? Okay, so I'm trying to target Google server, which let's say is going to be managed by US, and I'm trying to go through a server that is there in Russia and China. So the law enforcement from US is not going to be having the jurisdiction to request IP addresses, and they're not going to be cooperating also because of the political scenario that is happening. So this is where things get a little or too much difficult. So if you're going to be leveraging or using servers across different countries, so the coordination between the law enforcement is going to be very difficult. So that is going to be the first difficulty. And the second difficulty is obviously there has to be like logs that are stored in here, and only then you'll be able to identify and see you're able to track it back to the final portion, right? So now this is what we're going to be calling it as Tor circuit. Okay, so the precursor to dark web. So basically, instead of me trying to directly access the Google server, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using a browser called Tor browser on my laptop. The Tor browser is going to be communicating to this Tor circuit. So there are like several hundreds to thousands of servers that are managed by Tor circuit. You will not be able to predefine like which path you're going to take, and they're not going to be storing logs as well. So it is going to be dynamically allocated these three servers, and then the communication is going to happen. So this basically provides you with a great level of anonymity. Okay, so even if I do something with a malicious intent, it is going to be extremely difficult to track it back to this particular user or that IP address. So this user's IP address, to getting to this user's IP address itself is going to be a difficult task because of the relay in between. Okay, and you can try and get details from this server and then try to track it back, but it is going to be theoretically it is possible, but the practical aspect, because of the involvement of different countries and the logs which need to ensure that these are being the communication is being logged up, is not going to be there. So even if you try and go to the server, it is not going to be having any details as to what communication happened. So this is like your circuit that provides a lot of anonymity. Okay, so I hope it is clear until this part, because the crux of how dark web works is going to be in this place. So now when we talk about like actual dark web, so there is going to be a slight variation. Okay, and yeah, before getting into the variation, this list here, which we call it as exit node, which is going to be talking to the actual server, the Tor circuit or the Tor makes it very public. Okay, so this is where the intention behind Tor comes in. So as I started with, Tor is not the place built for cyber criminals, right? So it is just providing you anonymity. It is allowing you to disassociate your physical portion and your cyberspace. So that is being leveraged by the cyber attacks. So the intention is to provide anonymity, right? So that is the intention of the Tor circuit. So anonymity could be for legitimate purpose as well. Let's say if you're going to be trying to go and search in Google right now, and if you access like LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever you searched, that product is coming in your ads, right? So basically you don't have like a safe presence. So if you want to have like an anonymous presence and you're concerned about your privacy, this is going to be a very good tool that is going to be helping out. But that privacy is being abused, and it is not a legal, or let's say an illegal place in by definition. Okay, so that is where this IP addresses are provided by this Tor circuit. So what they're saying is, I'm going to be giving you a list of IP addresses. So if any communication comes to your server from this list of IP addresses, it means that they are using Tor circuit. So if I'm going to be having a banking application, let's say, and I don't want people to be accessing my banking application through Tor, I can simply block this list of IP address, and anybody who's using Tor will not be able to access my application. So that's what I'm saying. You Tor, it is not designed for cyber criminals. It is actually designed by US naval researcher to provide anonymity. So this is again a public list. If you access this URL, you will be able to identify the list of all IP addresses. So if you are receiving a communication from this IP address, it basically means that it is somebody is using Tor to access your application. Okay. So moving on to the crux of dark web. So right now we focused on the anonymity of the user, but dark web, when we say, it is going to be focusing on the anonymity of the server as well. Okay. So dark web, if I'm going to be hosting a server, in general, if I'm going to be hosting a server like Google, everybody will be able to pinpoint and say Google server is here in the internet. I told you, right? You're going to be knowing their IP address. By knowing their IP address, you're going to be knowing which ISP it is going to be associated with, and then you'll be able to track it back to the particular location. So that is going to be possible. But if I want to host application and I want to make sure that nobody will be able to identify where my application is hosted based out of, so that is where dark web is going to be coming into picture. So it is going to be called as .onion websites, just like how we use google.com. So there is going to be like random strings .onion, and these servers can be accessed and communicated only through the Tor circuit. So if I try to access it over internet, it is not going to be accessible. Okay, you will not be able to see the pages that are published in dark web from the internet. You have to go through this Tor circuit. So this is why it is extremely difficult for law enforcement to identify where the servers are being hosted. It not only provides anonymity for the users who are accessing it. Let's say you are hosting a, I'll go back quickly. So if I'm going to be hosting a Google server, I will know where the user is coming from, right? So this is like directly knowing who your users are. It not only provides anonymity to the users, it is also going to be providing anonymity the servers. So this is where like the illegal marketplaces like drugs or weapons are being abused. So if I'm going to be hosting a server on dark web, it is going to be technically it is not possible to trace it back to the particular location. However, there are again like few weaknesses around it. So this is going to be hosted on the internet as well. It is just that it is not going to be accessible. So what happens is if I'm going to be an attacker, okay, so I am the one who's managing the server, right? I am the one who's building the web page and all. So I will be able to access the server over the internet. It is just that the users who are accessing the actual web page are not going to be able to see the IPs of this, and this server here will not know who the users are, and the users will not know where the server is going to be from. So this provides like a whole anonymity shield, which is why it is causing a lot of trouble from a law enforcement perspective and cyber attack or crime perspective. So that being said, is it completely safe? Which is not the case. So there might be certain other weaknesses which can give away your identity as well. Let's say this server, I have set up the web server, right? So if I accidentally configure it in a unsafe manner, people who are accessing it will be able to identify the IP address. So there are like certain weaknesses which can be used to disclose the IP address, but most of the people are safe from that perspective. So when I'm going to be building some application for the dark web, I'll make sure that it is not having any vulnerabilities. So this is the crux of dark web. So there are like basically in terms of internet, IP address is where you'll be able to using it. IP address is what you'll be using to identify who the users are. But we are trying to mask that IP address by using a anonymous circuit in between, which is basically stopping you from identifying who the server is or who the users are. Okay, so I hope it is clear. So I'm not going to, this itself is on a technical perspective, but if you actually look at like how it is being designed, it gets into too technical, which I'm not going to right now. So that being said, I'll move to the next slide where we'll try and discuss what are the crimes that people were able to uncover even if they had used dark web. So one of the famous, investigations that you will see. This is from a Harvard student in I think 2013 or something. Okay, so basically I'm a student. I have my final exams. Okay, so what I did is I used this Tor browser and then I sent an email to the university mentioning that there is a bomb in the university. Okay, so with what I had explained you right now, it is not going to be possible to track back the user. So that is what that particular person's ideology was, but there was just like one small mistake. Okay, so he actually used the university's Wi-Fi to send this email, and when the university was analyzing the logs that I explained you a little earlier, so they saw that somebody had connected to the Tor network, because that is a public list, right? So you'll be able to see whether people are actually connecting to Tor or not. You will just not be able to say which server they're connecting to and where is the server, but you'll be able to clearly say that, okay, this user is connecting to Tor and then this is coming from Tor. That is going to be possible. So since he had used university's Wi-Fi, they were investigating the logs and they found out that a particular person had connected to Tor at the same moment they received the email. So they were able to look into this laptop and they confirmed that Tor was installed, and then he was the actual person behind this incident. So although from a complete technological aspect perspective, it is not going to be possible for you to get back the IP address, there are other flaws that are being done which reveals the user's identity. So another such incident is from a Silk Road. Silk Road was the famous or one of the famous uh, you know illegal marketplaces that was there in 2013. So when dark web was getting popular, Silk Road is the place where you will be able to get all those illegal items. So this Silk Road was also eventually identified by the law enforcement, and they were able to take it down. So this is actually rather interesting. So what happened is, this server that you told you, right? There was some misconfiguration in the server, which revealed this IP address. So the law enforcement immediately found out that the IP address is based on Iceland. They went there and then they confiscated the server. Okay, so that was happened, and then what they were able to do is they were able to identify who is managing this server. So this communication is happening over the internet. So they were able to identify that, okay, so from this IP address, somebody is managing the server. So once this server is known or compromised, they were able to get back to this. But again, here he was using like other technologies like VPN to hide his identity again. So, but they were able to identify a particular IP address, but they were not able to associate it to one identity because of like other technologies. Okay, so that happened, and then what happened is there was another guy who was posting basically a job opportunity for Silk Road. So this is the job opportunity. It says that there is a community backed by Bitcoin. Okay, and then we are looking for a IT professional to build that application now. And this is where the problem is. So there, this guy had given his Gmail address. So this is the name of the guy who ran the Silk Road. So this is from a completely different website in an unrelated place. Okay, so they just found out that Altoid username was promoting Silk Road, and then they were able to identify that this is the Gmail address. So Gmail obviously is a legal, it is going to be a US law bound application. So they were able to identify the IP address from which the Gmail is being accessed, and the IP address that was being accessed by the dark web server and this user was the same IP address. So they were able to confirm that this is the user who was actually running Silk Road, and then they actually arrested him. This was also a very famous case. Whenever you research about dark web, this is going to be one of the famous things that happened around 2013. So although technically there are difficulties to identify, there are operational flaws that people make is going to be helping you to identify who the person is. So this is the quick intro or a high level understanding in terms of what dark web is and how it is being leveraged to perform malicious activities. So the next part is on Bitcoin. So for Bitcoin, I have not prepared any slides because it is going to be more on the theoretical perspective, like what Bitcoin is and how it is being leveraged. So I don't have slides. I'll just give you my insights. And again, Bitcoin as a technology, it is like an extremely well thought out, well planned technology. And again, even for Bitcoin, the idea was not to, have something that is going to be helping you to do malicious activities on the internet. That was not the intent. So the cryptography or the mathematics that went into designing Bitcoin, it was extremely good. Okay, so the actual design and all, the person name is Satoshi. Okay, so the person who designed it, it is actually a well thought design, and the idea was rather simple. Okay, but it was a well thought out plan. So that is why or how Bitcoin came in. So let's try to understand like why Bitcoin is being used by attackers or cyber criminals. Before we get into the part, I just want to make sure that I kill out certain hypes and misinformation that is spreading out. Okay, so whenever people hear Bitcoin now, they'll immediately associate, okay, whatever transactions that are happening in Bitcoin, nobody will be able to find it out. Okay, so it is like completely hidden, completely anonymous. So that is not actually the case. So Bitcoin is a complete open ledger. So the way Bitcoin works is it is going to be having some sort of passbook. If you have been to bank, you know that there's going to be passbook, right? And if you know a little accounting, you know what Bitcoin is a virtual currency. You don't have anything physically to hold. Okay, so it is just that in a central repository, you're going to have something mentioning that okay, so this user have this many bitcoins. So that is how simple Bitcoin is. You're going to be having a public ledger or a public log stating, see, these accounts are there. Okay, and in these accounts, these money is being held or these Bitcoin values are being held. So that is how basically Bitcoin is. So right now we will be able to go and see whatever transactions that are happening in Bitcoin. So the whole of Bitcoin is publicly accessible. You will be able to see at what time, from which address Bitcoin was transferred to which address. So that is all public information and it is not like anonymous. So the only thing that holds anonymity of Bitcoin is, I told you, right? So it is just like an account. You're going to be having an address and then the value is going to be stored at that address. So the anonymity factor is just the association between the user in the real world. Let's say I, as a user, if I want to create a Bitcoin account, there is literally nothing required. I can go to the internet and then I'll be able to create a Bitcoin account. So this disassociation of the physical, actual human being and then the address is where the problem arises. Let's say if you want to open a bank account, obviously they're going to be verifying who you are, right? So we have KYC and all those stuffs. So that is basically to associate the bank account to the user. So the only problem or the intention or the good thing about Bitcoin is that it is not going to be associated to any physical human being by design. Okay, so as long as you know that address, you will be able to transact, and you don't require any details like banking and all to do any sorts of transaction. So it is just that address that is required on the Bitcoin network. So as long as you send the address to someone and they send the data, money to that address, it is done. It is a done deal. Okay. So the problem in Bitcoin again, in terms of law enforcement, arises because of this. Because it is going to be nearly impossible from a design perspective to identify which user this wallet, we call it wallets. Okay, so wallet address is what we call it. How, which user this wallet address is associated to, that is the difficult part. So I'll quickly again like go into the Bitcoin, show you whatever I told you right now, so that it is going to be easier for you to see. Let me stop the share and go back to the browser. So right now, anyone on the internet can go and see how much Bitcoin is being held in which wallet. This is what I told you. This is a complete public information. Okay. So that is how by design it works. So probably this is like the richest Bitcoin wallet. So I'm just sorting it by Bitcoin rich list. And this is like the analysis of statistics around Bitcoin. So how many addresses are there? How many? What is the value of Bitcoin that is there in the addresses? Let's say zero to none, around 7.39% of the address they don't have any Bitcoin. So similarly, you will be able to see that okay, this address holds these many Bitcoins, and if you go into the address, you will also be able to see the transactions that happened in that address. So we call it blocks. Okay, just let it load. So we're going to be calling it blocks. So this is going to say where the money came from and then where it went. So all these information about Bitcoin is going to be completely public. So if you know somebody's wallet address, you can just go ahead and see how many Bitcoins he has and then what is the value of it. So that is pretty straightforward. That is not hacking. That is not like you're bypassing something. That is the design. As long as you know somebody's address, you'll be able to see how much, not just how much Bitcoins is there, whatever transactions that had happened through that address is also going to be completely visible. So nothing of that sort is anonymous. The only thing that is anonymous is what? Whose or this Bitcoin address, who does it belong to? So there is not going to be any tracks of that as a part of the design. And that is why people are leveraging Bitcoins when they want to do some malicious transaction. So let's say I'm Shiva. So I go out to the internet and then I mention that okay, anybody who wants to donate, give it to this address. Okay, I put my address publicly and I myself associate it to this name. So Shiva has this address. So once this association is done, this is done by me, right? Later, let's say probably 5 years down the line, I turn out to be a cyber criminal. Okay, and if I'm going to be using this address to get money from the attacks that I'm getting, so this is how the association of the identities are going to be happening. Okay, so there is no actual repository that keeps track of the user's identities, and that is why people are leveraging it. Even here, from a statistical perspective, people are actually trying to understand it. Let's say I'm doing some malicious transaction with the address, and I'm getting money on this from a actual identity associated perspective, then my identity is going to be exposed. So this is how you'll be able to identify and track which user is which user. It is because of the mistakes that they're doing. So if they're going to be extremely cautious and keep their identity completely dissociated from the Bitcoin network, it is going to be practically impossible to identify the malicious portion. And that is the reason why Bitcoin is being leveraged in all of the it is changing now because of the reason that I told you right now, that this is not a privacy driven blockchain network. Okay, so the idea here is not to provide identity, they just have it from a wallet address perspective. So right now there are much more cryptocurrencies that are focused on privacy, which you will not be able to verify. Even you won't be able to see how much money is there in this wallet. So that level of cryptocurrencies have occurred right now. So that is obviously the go-to choice for the cyber criminals right now. But the reason why this was used is the one that I mentioned right now. So I'll quickly close with a last thought. So where does this money come from? So we are talking like for so like past 10 minutes, I was telling you that this money is there, you'll be able to store it. So the money is coming in from two ways. Okay. So if I want to simplify, it is going to be from only one single way. There is a concept called mining. Okay. So where I'm going to be doing some mathematical computation, okay, using my computer, for which I'm going to be getting a reward. So if I'm going to be doing mining, I'm going to be getting Bitcoin, like not like in the values of what you're seeing in the internet, but that is the source of Bitcoin by design. I'm going to be spending some computational power, and then I'm going to be getting a reward in terms of Bitcoin. So if I, as a person, I'm going to be getting the Bitcoin only from this source, then it is going to be completely anonymous. So nobody will be able to track it back to my Bitcoin wallet address that it is Shivraman's address. But again, there are legal aspects to it. Let's say I also own a Bitcoin wallet right now from an investment perspective. So for me to open a wallet to legally, so I have like $1,000. I want to change it to Bitcoin. So this transaction where money and Bitcoin is involved, so there has to be some broker, right? So all the legal brokers who are accepting money and then providing you Bitcoins are going to be asking for KYC. So one of the wallets that you saw right now is going to be Binance. So this is Binance, who's like a very famous, platform for trading Bitcoins. So if you want yourself to be a user in Binance, you have to provide your identity. So now once I provide my identity to Binance, if something happens around this wallet, just like how ISP was able to track back to my identity, Binance will be able to track it back to my identity. So Bitcoin is not like completely secure. Okay. So the reason why it is being leveraged is because of the disassociation between the identity and the wallet addresses. So I was not able to dive too deep into Bitcoin because it is a very, very vast topic. So I just wanted to give you an understanding from a cybercrime perspective why they are using it. Is there a possibility to identify the actual user? So I think that is pretty much it from my side. So I'll just go back to the slides. 1 second. Yeah. So I think that is pretty much it from my side. Okay. So thank you once again. Thank you so much for the university and the team who organized it for this opportunity. As they mentioned, like I am really passionate about sharing knowledge as well. So I started my career in training. So I'm really passionate about sharing my knowledge as well. So it is something that I feel happy about. I just hope like you learn something that is technically valid, which is the truth and not around hype. When you see media and all, it is going to be around hype. So instead of going into hype, what is the actual thing that is happening and why are they leveraging it in terms of cybercrime? I hope got some level of insights from this perspective. So if you have any, clarifications or queries, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. So this is the URL. So you'll be able to, reach out to me. If you have any other queries around like, how these things work, I'm open to the conversations. So that is pretty much it from my side. Thank you so much.